Estimates C 2025-2026. Please note once again that these amounts are estimates and that committee may spend less for this review. Any funds not spent by the committee will be returned to the liaison committee. If you have any questions, the clerk will be able to answer them. Does the committee wish to adopt this budget? Very well. It is adopted. Pursuant to Standing Order 108-2 and the motion adopted by the committee on September 18th, the committee is meeting to study Canada's capacity to return foreign nationals with criminal records. Now, I would like to welcome our witness for the first hour. This hour, Peter German, President and CEO for the International Center for Criminal Law Reform and Criminal Justice Policy. Welcome. You have 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur Chair. Good afternoon. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Thank you for the invitation to appear before this committee, and allow me to introduce myself briefly. I was a member of the RCMP for 31 years, retiring as Deputy Commissioner. I also served as Deputy Commissioner of Correctional Service Canada. As President and Executive Director of the International Center for Criminal Law Reform, ICLEAR, I have the privilege of guiding our institute as its associates undertake projects within Canada and abroad. We are a United Nations affiliate located at the University of British Columbia. We are the result of a treaty between Canada and the UN. Several years ago, we created the Vancouver Anti-Corruption Centre within ICLEAR. I applaud the committee for seeking recommendations to prevent the entry of individuals who pose public safety risks while strengthening the effectiveness of Canada's deportation mechanisms. Your work is both timely and important. As indicated in the motion guiding this study, there are reports that 1,635 foreign nationals with criminal records are currently facing deportation. Of these, approximately 600 have failed to attend their deportation proceedings and their whereabouts are unknown. Another 431 have been found guilty of serious crimes, and 361 individuals have been avoiding deportation for more than 2 years. The numbers provided to this committee by the President of CBSA are even more shocking. Imagine that you are a foreign national with a criminal background facing an uncertain future in your home country or in another state. Where in the world might you choose to go? Probably a country that values multiculturalism, where large diaspora communities exist, where justice is fair, where the police do not abuse their authority, where healthcare and education are free, and where individuals enjoy strong legal rights. In short, you may well choose Canada. Now imagine that after entering the country illegally, you are eventually discovered and arrested. You claim refugee status and seek your release while your case proceeds through the system. Would you sit around and wait for CBSA to knock on your door? Canada is an oasis for those seeking freedom and opportunity, but it can also become attractive to those seeking to exploit our openness for criminal purposes. We cannot allow ourselves to be taken for dupes. The brazen shootings in Surrey, Abbotsford, and the regional districts around Toronto are examples in point. Transnational organized crime is firmly rooted in Canada. Although it exists across the country, it is most visible in our major urban centres. That said, we are also aware of large-scale drug laboratories operating in rural areas. Canada has often been described as a high-value, low-risk country for transnational organized crime. The very qualities that make Canada a desirable place to live, stability, prosperity, and strong legal protections, can also make it an attractive platform for criminal organizations. At our borders, we rely heavily on the Canada Border Services Agency, a customs and revenue agency, not a police force. We have no port police and only private railway police. Ultimately, the fail-safe remains the RCMP, which is often expected to respond to a wide array of challenges across its federal policing responsibilities. As you have heard from previous witnesses, many of the issues surrounding deportation stem from process. Canada's federal agencies work hard, and the people within them are dedicated professionals. Our Charter of Rights and Freedoms is fundamental to our democracy, and our criminal justice system, judges, prosecutors, and police, functions with integrity. What we lack, I suggest, is a sense of urgency. Complacency can be a killer. In an increasingly unstable world where events occurring halfway around the globe can affect Canada almost immediately, we must ensure that we remain vigilant. The committee has asked for recommendations on how individuals with criminal backgrounds can be prevented from entering Canada in the first place and how deportation processes can be made more effective. First, the challenges faced by the RCMP are not the result of having too many mandates. Much larger organizations operate effectively with multiple mandates. What the RCMP requires is a significant infusion of resources. I endorse the comments of Mr. Brian Sauvé of the National Police Federation to this committee. At present, the RCMP is tasked with a wide range of federal responsibilities. These include preventing drugs from entering and exiting the United States through border enforcement, protecting national security, combating cyber and financial crime, and addressing transnational organized crime. Yet at the same time, the organization continues to face resource reductions as part of broader government spending constraints. Contract policing, largely self-funded through agreements with provinces and municipalities, is not the issue. Creating new agencies is not the answer. The challenge lies in the underfunding of the federal policing mandate. Second, we must consider the consequences of releasing individuals with known criminal backgrounds while their cases proceed through lengthy legal processes. Communities across Canada are already grappling with the repeated release of prolific property and violent offenders shortly after arrest. A similar dynamic exists with foreign nationals facing deportation. The immigration system must be properly resourced to deal with cases on a priority basis, eliminating the need to release high-risk individuals because of time delays inherent in the system. Third, and closely related to these concerns, is the issue of border security. Our borders quite literally define Canada. A comprehensive and secure border strategy is essential, not only to protect Canadians, but also to send a clear message to criminal networks that Canada is no longer an easy target. Fourth, priority must be given to the removal of high-risk individuals through joint police CBSA operations. Simply placing these individuals on the CPIC computer system, as we do with normal warrants, often means that no further action takes place unless the police happen upon an individual. Members of the committee, thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you. I appreciate the importance of the work you are undertaking, and I hope my remarks contribute to your deliberations. I would be pleased to answer any questions you may have. Merci, Monsieur Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Gurman, which allows us to turn to MP Caputo for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. German. We've lived parallel lives in some respects, although you've had a much more interesting and much more experience in a lot of respects. I topped out as a parole officer. You made it to deputy commissioner. So well done. And your work in policing and criminal law cannot be overstated. So it's a real pleasure and honor. Also want to commend you for the fact that you actually observed Mr. Sauvé's evidence. One of the things that we have dealt with at this committee that surprises me, and I'm not saying this as a partisan, I think everybody around the table should at least raise an eyebrow to this idea, and that is the role of students, current role of students within CBSA. Now, make no mistake, CBSA needs students. I think it's good for mentoring. I think it's good for experience. I started out in corrections as a student, for instance. No issue with that. The problem is at any given time, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but up to 50%, I believe, on the front lines at YVR, Vancouver Airport, and other places are students. They are indistinguishable from somebody who's gone through the 20 weeks or whatever it is of training to be a CBSA officer. Student has 3 weeks, one of which is use of force. That means 2 weeks. And that is the principal point of entry for some of the people that we are talking about today. I'm at a loss for why this is permitted. I think it's all about money and staffing. Could you comment on that, please?
Yeah, thank you. And let me trade compliments. We have the best parole officers in the world, and kudos to you for having done that job, which is not an easy job. I would answer that in short by saying, do we allow student police officers to patrol our streets? We don't, right? We expect our police officers to complete training before they're out there. There is a real role for students. The student program at Customs and CBSA has been around for a long time. But I think the issue is, why is there a disproportionate number at the airport? I've heard that from the union publicly. Are they working with a trained CBSA officer, or are they working, as you say, on their own? So there's a role for students, but there's no question that there's also a place for students. And I would just draw that analogy with police forces. We expect our police to be fully trained before they hit the road.
Well, you make an excellent example. Now, my understanding, Dr. German, is that students are expected to be under somebody's supervision. I mean, everybody's under someone's supervision, but when I mean that, I mean like they're tethered, right? Whenever there are practicum students, even in Parliament, we have interns, and generally they go with somebody that would certainly never do the work of a parliamentarian. My understanding is that they are working independently, and that a member of the public would have no idea. Well, obviously somebody who's coming in has no idea about who they're dealing with, and I think that should alarm Canadians. Moving on, one thing I found interesting about your opening comments was you highlighted, we have this issue that brings us here today, but really there are so many contributing factors. One of the things you spoke about was bail, and I could tell you there's been a huge change in bail, and one of the things I attribute it to is that the laws of bail on the books haven't changed, but the common law of bail has. And what I mean by that is that the courts come out with decisions, and they're often favorable to the accused, because they will challenge them, sometimes favorable to the Crown. When I say favorable, I mean they promote more detention, but often to the accused. We have not seen Parliament legislate in light of those decisions. We've seen just straight as it goes. Do you think that that's an issue, that we haven't had any meaningful bail legislation in light of various serious common law decisions from the Supreme Court of Canada?
Yeah, I've personally worked with municipalities in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia that are very concerned about the current state of bail. And I really do think we have to deal not only with the repeat violent offenders, but the repeat and prolific property offenders. That is a real issue in this country, and we really do have to deal with it.
It's interesting you say that, because a lot of the time, we talk about violence, and violence is unacceptable. But what people don't realize is that if, somebody like a small business that, the owner maybe makes net $60,000, if they're victimized by 10 shoplifters at $10 a day, doesn't sound like much. That's $100 a day. That's $500 to $600 a week. That is $2,000 to $2,500 a month, and $30,000 up to $30,000 a year. So when we say, oh, it's just a bag of chips or whatever, my experience is that the bail system is no longer dealing with those people, what some people might call small-time criminals, but their impact is profound, it's disproportionate, they take up innumerable resources, and they're no longer being referred to detention. Often they're actually released at the scene. Any comment on that?
Well, I agree 100%. London Drugs on West Georgia Street in Vancouver, gone because they just can't maintain that business. It's going to become a police training academy, which is an interesting irony in all of that. But no, it's definitely a problem where we are in Vancouver, the prolific, and not just Vancouver, Kelowna, Surrey, the suburbs, etc. Abbotsford would have the same thing. Prolific, very small number, but prolific property offenders. And they have to be put in that same category as the violent offenders. And oftentimes they're suffering from the same issues. You know, these are not necessarily bad people. A lot of them are people with mental health issues. They've got drug issues, addictions, etc. But the net result is what they cause on the streets, and as you've indicated.
Thank you, and I'll pronounce your name properly this time. Thank you, Mr. German. And we'll now turn to MP Akan for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First, I want to thank you, Dr. German, for your service in the RCMP for over 3 decades. And as a former Deputy Commissioner in the RCMP, you certainly have a distinguished career, and it's a privilege to have you here, especially as an academician today. As you know, we are studying the removal of foreign nationals with criminal record. The goal of this study is to understand and improve our ability to action on those removals and enforcement against visa overstays and even criminal inadmissibility. So given your testimony today, you highlighted the importance of the resources, the tools that our law enforcement requires, some of which are also included in C14 for our bail reform, C2 for stronger borders. Additionally, our government introduced C12, which is now also in the Senate. C12 focuses on improving asylum claims processes and eligibility requirements to support the CBSA in removing individuals from Canada who are involved in criminality, including extortion. As an academic and a lawyer, how would you evaluate the effectiveness of Bill C12 in supporting removal processes?
Yeah, well, thank you, first of all, for your kind comments. And in terms of the legislation, I don't profess to be an expert in the legislation that's underway in the Commons and the Senate, but I think anything directed at these issues is good. And obviously the proof is when that legislation is passed and has royal assent and is in force, and we see, the results on the street. All efforts in that direction are good. And it is nice to see that attention is being paid to this issue. I think it's been, far too long in coming, but we're there now, so that's a good thing.
Thank you very much. So to follow up, are there any legislative reforms that you would recommend us here today?
Well, I'm not too sure I'm the right person for that. I mean, there are all sorts of, I'm sure, recommendations that could be made. I would be reluctant to just, go further than I have in my comments, which are fairly general. Definitely, the RCMP, CBSA, the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, they're the experts in dealing with this, and they can get into the minutia. I think what I wanted to emphasize is that process is so important. And my fear, let's say, with regard to the removals, is that there are thousands of removals, but are we getting the right people? The people that don't want to be found, and they're the ones with, criminal records and so forth. It's very difficult, and as I mentioned, we don't want to just put people on a police computer system and hope that they get stopped in a traffic stop. We need to go after them.
Thank you, Dr. German. So you have done extensive work regarding anti-money laundering in British Columbia. And from your experience in the RCMP, understand that crime is often transnational and complex, which you also mentioned on your speech. In the context of your work, in some cases, foreign persons are linked to and involved with transnational money laundering. So given this, could you speak to any legal challenges faced where individuals are linked transnational crime and subject to a removal?
Yeah, I think what we find is that there are a lot of organized crime groups that are ethnic-based, and they operate out of their own diasporas. And the problem is, if you think about this, if you are involved in criminal activity, and you come to a country like Canada, you're not necessarily able to speak English well. Who do you prey on? You prey on people within your own community, within your own diaspora. And it's only after you become familiar with language and how things operate that you start to spread your wings. And we've seen that with one organized crime group after another. They tend to start out being quite ethnically based, whether it's Iranian organized crime, Vietnamese organized crime, or, as I always say, Caucasian, Canadian organized crime, which is our biker gangs. We tend to start in our own little area, and then they spread their wings. I don't know if that answers your question, but
do I have time, Mr. Chair? So yes, you definitely answered. So following up, given that Bill C-12 strengthens Canada's anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing regime, enabling FinTrack to share supervisory information with members of Financial Institutions Supervisory Committee, would you say these measures enhance Canada's ability to identify federally regulated financial institutions involved in illicit financing?
We've had a whole string of amendments to the Proceeds of Crime Money Laundering legislation over a number of years, and it is getting strengthened over time, more and more. I am very pleased by what we are seeing from FinTrack now in terms of they've put their big boy pants on, so to speak, and they're issuing fines. It's been 25 years to get to this point, but they're doing it. And so I think we're seeing, as you've indicated, with the legislation, with C-12, but also with how the agencies are operating, that they are starting to take this seriously because they have to, quite frankly. Money laundering is a huge issue.
Thank you very much, Mr. German. I'm done, Mr. Chair.
Thank you to you, MP Akan, ce qui nous amène à passer la parole à Madame de Bellefeuille pour...
And now, Madame de Bellefeuille, 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. German. Mr. German, are you all right hearing French, or do you need the headpiece? But please don't start counting my time now so that he can put his headset on. Is that all right? Can you hear me? Can you hear the interpretation? Okay, now we'll start. Thank you very much, Mr. German, for your remarks. We're looking for solutions here. You said that, in your opinion, one of the solutions is to better fund the RCMP or the CBSA so that there can be officers on the ground, so there can be information sharing. And for the time being, the government is hiring another 1,000 officers, but is also reducing the budget for those agencies, which is difficult for the ecosystem at large of those agencies that deal with criminals. Criminals know where the weak spots are in Canada. So there are currently criminal foreign nationals that were accused of crimes, that are waiting for their trial, that have a removals order, and that cannot be found. Do you think one possible solution would be, as soon as a foreign national is arrested, that could he be put in preventive detention to make sure that he doesn't hide in the country? Would that be a good solution?
Merci. Thank you for the question. I think it's always a balance, isn't it? And I think that's what I tried to stress with my comments, is that it would be nice if we could keep people in detention until their case was dealt with. Because once they're out, you may not see them again. Certainly the ones that we're interested in, you won't see them again. But on the other hand, we have to balance that with fairness, the Charter of Rights, and all those principles that we believe in. So I think ultimately it comes down to resources, having enough people to process these, and also prioritizing cases, making sure that those high-risk individuals, that those cases go to the top and they're dealt with as quickly as possible, so that you don't run into that issue of fairness, charter rights, and so forth.
I'm worried about if a foreign national commits a violent crime in Canada, he has to be he has to go to trial here and deserve his punishment if he is accused. Some MPs think that as soon as someone commits a violent crime, they should be automatically deported to their country of origin. In my opinion, if you commit a crime in Quebec or Canada, you ought to be judged and incarcerated. And after you serve your time, be deported. Do you agree with that principle? That the foreign national ought to be judged according to our laws and do their time here before being deported?
I do agree that they should be judged by our courts. If they commit a criminal offense in this country, they answer to the courts here, and then presumably there would be an immediate deportation afterwards.
Pour ceux et celles
For those who are found guilty and who have served their time in a provincial or federal prison and then after have a removal order, do you think that those individuals should be automatically deported and that should be undergone by a police agency?
Well, again, when we say automatically deported, I think we again have to be alive to our charter and the fairness issue. There could be reasons why you can't deport a particular person to a third country. I mean, there are those issues. So I don't think we could say automatic, but I think when you've got a person with a criminal background committing a criminal offense in this country, we don't want that person. So they should be deported. They answer to our courts and then they're deported. I would probably remove the word automatic, but there has to be a process to do that, an efficient process.
And do I have any time? In that case, do you have any suggestions for amendments to the criminal code? Is there anything we could change in a legislative sense to better deal with foreign nationals who commit a crime in Canada who are judged and imprisoned and that can't be deported? Is there anything we could change at a legislative level? You mentioned the charter, but is there anything we can change on a legislative basis, in your opinion?
Yeah, I'd have to reflect on that, to be honest with you. I mean, in terms of the criminal code, as is often the case, and my friend from Kamloops actually mentioned that in his comments, we have the laws. The laws tend to be pretty good in this country. It's how they're interpreted or enforced that is of greater importance almost, I mean, it's great to have laws on the books, but if you don't enforce them or if they get interpreted in such a way that they're ineffective, that becomes the problem. So it's not. I don't necessarily think there are changes that have to be made to our criminal code. There may well be to the immigration legislation, and I'm not an expert in that, and I wouldn't pretend to be.
Merci.
Merci, Madame de Bellefeuille.
Thank you, Madame de Bellefeuille. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. German, for being here today. It is truly appreciated, and I do want to recognize again your service with the RCMP as well. We all, this whole team appreciates your service as well. I do want to highlight the important topics that you mentioned when you were talking specifically about the community that I represent as well, Abbotsford, the Lower Mainland itself, and Surrey as well, and how in British Columbia the crime has run rampant. In British Columbia, where we are both from, we know that 14 individuals were charged with extortion that immediately filed for asylum claims after being charged. Do you believe Canada's asylum system should be available to individuals who have already been charged or convicted of serious violent crimes?
Yeah, good question. I feel your pain because we all are feeling that pain in the Lower Mainland, particularly in Surrey, Abbotsford, where all the shootings have been taking place. Again, I don't think we can be totally black and white about this and say, no, this group of people are not entitled to asylum, but I would say it should be the exception. And our legislation should, or our immigration laws, regulations, you name it, should be fashioned in such a way that it is the exception to the rule that a person could seek asylum in a situation like that. It just defies logic that you can, but mind you that they're innocent until proven guilty, and that therein lies this balance that we have to keep in mind.
Okay, and I do remember I recall that you said that there was need for priority in certain cases. There were certain high-risk individuals that we need to make sure we prioritize because they are abusing the loopholes that allow non-citizens convicted of serious crimes to remain in Canada longer than they should. Do you have anything to say on that further?
Well, not really further than what I've already said. I mean, I think we acknowledge the fact that we have issues here. There is a problem, and certainly it's been highlighted in the Lower Mainland and in Ontario in the regional districts. No, I don't. I really can't add anything more to that.
Okay. Well, with your expertise given, I would like to ask you for what specific legislations reforms would you like to see or recommend that we implement in our asylum system that is not misused by individuals involved in serious criminal activities?
Well, as I've already stated, asylum in those circumstances should be the exception to the rule. And everybody is judged equally in this country. If you start shooting up a place using guns and threatening and all of the extortion, you answer to our courts. If you're a foreign national, you're convicted, you should be gone, right? And but we do have processes that we have to follow. I get that. And oftentimes these processes take a long time, and that's why I'm really I'm saying it's almost more about process than legislation. It's actually having the people that can do the job, giving priority to the serious cases, moving the system along.
With that given, as we saw the rampant increase of extortion all of a sudden in the Lower Mainland, do you think presenting Bill C-12 with FinTrack involved was the right implication, or do you think there could be more done? As what I have been informed by constituents, there are loopholes which are being abused currently, like money exchange businesses that are actually where money is laundered through. Is there anything that you could expand on from that?
There's lots we could be doing. In British Columbia now, we don't use our proceeds of crime legislation. It's just not being used, and that is the legislation that deals with money laundering and proceeds of crime. In British Columbia now, we use civil forfeiture, which is take away what people shouldn't have in the first place. It works effectively, but we do not use the money laundering legislation that's on the books, and that is largely due to one or two adverse court rulings, and the fact that civil forfeiture seems so much easier. But there are a number of these mechanisms out there that we're just not using, and the criminals know this. Organized crime knows this. They know the weak spots. We do not. For example, the RCMP eliminated its proceeds of crime unit a number of years ago, just like it eliminated its drug unit. It went to a different model, an organized crime model, but the specialists in proceeds of crime and money laundering essentially disappeared. FinTrack is an intelligence agency. FinTrack gathers intelligence, but it has to know what the police want.
I will have to ask you to wrap up. Thank you. Sorry for interrupting. MP Pawlowski for 5 minutes, please.
So our government says, and I'm quoting something from the government here, it says, foreign nationals who wish to enter Canada are screened by IRGC before they can enter the country, primarily to make sure they have not committed serious crimes, don't pose a security risk, or in good health. And part of that determination is obviously CSIS. So we're talking not just about people who've committed crimes in Canada, but people who've committed crimes in their home country. Now, I certainly believe there are bad apples coming into this country, people we don't want, and you'd have to be naive to think all immigrants are good people. But I've had, since the beginning of these meetings, had this unease about who we're calling as criminals. Now, you lead an institute on criminal law reform. You have a center for corruption. So I would take it you do international work, advise people from other countries. And certainly we all know that there are many, many countries in this world where the police are corrupt, the judiciary is corrupt. If you have money, you're either not going to be charged, or if you're charged, you're going to be found to be innocent. On the other hand, if you belong to the wrong political party, you oppose the leadership of the country, you may find yourself convicted of a crime, as, for example, happens pretty regularly in Russia, and you end up doing serious time in jail. So when we're talking about, when we're talking about these people who've committed crimes, like, how do we know? I mean, and do we trust the Russian government to say who's a criminal or who isn't, or so many countries in Africa? So I'm just wondering about, how fair is this system to people who've been accused of criminals, but for all we know, are just opponents of the government in power in those countries?
Yeah. Thank you. You make a very good point. And I guess that's why we rely on the expertise of agencies such as CSIS and the immigration authorities when vetting people coming into our country. There's no fail-safe, but yeah, obviously what is a criminal act in Canada may not be a criminal act elsewhere, or vice versa. So I hear you.
And I guess a problem I have with that is that even I, as a member of Parliament, cannot get answers when somebody is deemed a security risk for national security reasons. So I've been very involved with trying to help Afghans who helped our forces come into Canada. And then you hear that somebody's a security risk. And that just is an iron door that after that, you have no ability to question it. I ended up hearing that one of the people was a security risk, and it seemed because he owned a used car dealership that sold cars to the Taliban, which I'm pretty sure as a used car salesman, you don't care who you sell your cars to. So anyhow, what's the transparency in this process, and what's to protect the criminals from being kind of railroaded in when even people like myself who are elected officials don't really have the capacity to really question whether somebody's really a criminal or not.
Yeah, I think there are two concepts here that we don't want to mesh together, and that is security risks and criminal behavior. If someone is convicted of a criminal offense in another country, at least that is something tangible that you can examine, right? Presumably our authorities can say, okay, we consider that a criminal activity as well, and you don't want that person in the country. Being a security risk is a lot more amorphous, as you've indicated, like what exactly does that mean? So I think those are really two different issues. In terms of, I'm not in no position to give you advice on your client, but I mean, there are review agencies for CSIS decisions and so forth, but I don't know how effective that would be for your situation.
So you've been in policing for quite a while. You talked about crimes within ethnic communities, which certainly seems to be an issue at the moment. What's the best solution to that, number one? And number two, I'm pretty certain we're not the only country that has similar problems within ethnic communities. Can you give some examples of countries that you think have been particularly effective? And I would think part of the solution is getting police who come from those ethnic communities, but doesn't that open the door to the possibility of influence and corruption by their own members of their own community?
Very quickly, Mr. Gurman.
Yeah, I think there's our police forces are quite representative of the communities right now, multiple languages, multiple ethnicities in our police force. So I don't really see that as an issue. Sorry, I missed the first part of your question, but I think we're out of time.
Well, that's right. Maybe we will be able to come back at a different moment. Madame de Bellefeuille, pour 2 minutes et demie, s'il vous plaît.
Madame de Bellefeuille, 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much. I'll ask another solution-based question, Mr. German. Can you hear me? Yes, interpretation is working? Excellent. You told us right at the start, and you repeated it several times, that the secret is to have as many officers as possible. Is there also a collaboration challenge? Collaboration between the various law enforcement agencies? So police in Quebec, it's the SQ. In Ontario, there's the RCMP, the CBSA. Do you think that things can be improved in terms of collaboration and information sharing, with the goal of finding more foreign nationals that are that have committed crimes?
Yeah, thank you. Two things there. First of all, I would say in La Belle Province, the police actually work very well together. My experience is the Gendarmerie Royale de Canada, the Sûreté de Quebec, and the Ville de Montréal, they work very closely on organized crime cases. That's never really been an issue, my knowledge. When talking about the issue before this committee in terms of immigration, as I mentioned in my remarks, I think we should have joint CBSA police task forces, and that is something that Mr. Sauvé also said to this committee, because there's expertise at CBSA, but they're not police officers, and the police have a much wider scope, and so working in an integrated fashion, I think, is the way to go.
Vous savez, au Québec, il y a actuellement des expériences.
In Quebec at the moment, can you hear me? Yes, all right. So, between the SQ and the RCMP, they're working together on the North Coast, as well as with the Indigenous police. Together, they fight against organized crime. One of the recommendations on that study, well, maybe you would agree, that all Canadian and Quebec are armed for, or rather police bodies ought to work together against organized crime.
Vous en feriez une recommandation?
Would that be a recommendation?
Do work quite well together. I mean, there's this theory of integration of police forces, and they do work closely together. So I think we already have that. We're very fortunate in this country. We're not in a situation where, you know, the police are holding their secrets to themselves and not sharing and that sort of thing. So we have that. But it really is prioritizing the work that we do. And your earlier question, you know, you mentioned that I said, you know, we need resources. We need resources, but we have to target them as well. We have to be smart in how we use those resources. Go after the priority cases.
Merci beaucoup, le député.
Thank you very much. Now, MP Ang for 5 minutes.
Dr. German, glad to see you again. I've seen you speaking on several occasions. I represent Richmond Center Marple riding and used to be a city councillor, and you spoke to the city council a few times. Now, today you talk about the process problem, the lack of the sense of urgency problem. But to be honest, this is not something new. This has been going on for quite some time. So my question to you is this a lack of resources or a lack of political will? My assumption is that if there's a political will, there would be resources allocated. So your comments.
Yeah, and Richmond is one beautiful city. Lived in Richmond for well over 20 years, so it's very good to see you again. I often talk about both political will and bureaucratic will. I don't blame the politicians for everything, because politicians come and go with elections and so forth. Bureaucrats stay for a long time. So you need bureaucratic will at the municipal, provincial, and federal level as well to carry programs through. I think that's critical. And we see that in policing. Priorities change and so forth. So I guess I'm in agreement.
Okay. So my follow-up question is, again, you first wrote about dirty money in 2018. There's money laundering problem in the Lower Mainland, in the Vancouver model, that kind of thing. Now, so in these past years, have you seen any tangible, measurable improvements in all these areas?
Right. So just for context, I wrote 2 reports, Dirty Money and Dirty Money Part 2, and those were related to the casinos, real estate, and cars, organized crime generally in British Columbia 2018 and 2019. And I think, the primary focus was casinos. I think it's fair to say we've seen a dramatic change in casinos, not just because of my work. We had the Cullen Commission came after me. We had excellent reporting by various media outlets. So when the heat is on organized crime, they move somewhere else. And I think the important thing was we got them out of the casinos, effectively out of the casinos. So it's important now to keep them out of there. But where did they go? And now what we're dealing with is cryptocurrency. We're dealing with money exchange businesses. We're dealing with the supply chain for marijuana and competing with, legal marijuana. So unfortunately, organized crime doesn't just go away. It will move. But I think we've seen a marked change, at least with respect to the casinos.
Thank you. And I want to put my question in the context. Today we are talking about foreign criminals, doing crime in our country. So in your work, do you see there's a connection between foreign criminals interacting with local criminals to pose danger to our communities in drugs, money laundering, and all kinds of criminal activities?
Yes, definitely. Because again, foreign criminals come over here because they know somebody over here. And whether it's people in the same gang, whether it's people in the same community, whatever it might be, they've got connections. They don't just pop out of the blue in Canada. So definitely there are connections. And that's why you will see with the high-profile shootings and so forth, you will occasionally see people from Canada being, charged. It's not just foreign nationals. It can be, Canadians as well. They may well be connected to the gangs. We don't talk about organized crime anymore. We talk about transnational organized crime. Virtually all organized crime has a transnational component.
And lastly, I want to ask in opening remarks, you talk about there should be new strategies or more effective strategies for the border security. Again, can you elaborate further on that?
Well, I'm a bit of an old record on this, but we have no port police. We have no police in our ports, and Delta Port, Vancouver Port, largest port in the country, no port police. It's regulated by electronic fencing and security guards. That's a problem because we've had reports for a couple of decades now of organized crime in our ports. That's not a good thing. CBSA cannot be expected to also police our ports. That's just one example. I mentioned railways as well. We now have a railway system from Canada right through to Mexico. So we have to, get serious about this, as we are serious in the airports. We all go through screening in the airports, but it's wide open in the ports. That's why I talk about we need a border strategy.
Merci beaucoup pour cette.
Thank you very much for your remarks. And 5 minutes.
Le député Lauzon.
Or MP Lauzon.
Merci, merci.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. German, for being here. You have a very impressive 3-decade career behind you. We've mentioned investment. Pretty much all witnesses at one time or another mention funding. You've seen the evolution over generations. It's not just money that's changed. It's also technology, innovation. Today, there's AI. You haven't spoken much about that. Our advantage as a government in investing in new technology in order to nail criminals.
A very good point. We talk about criminals always being one step ahead of our system and our laws and so forth. But, AI, we're at such an early stage with AI. We just haven't tapped that potential yet. I mean, I love it. It really has made life a lot easier. And there's no doubt, and I can't speak with personal knowledge. I'm not in policing currently. I'm sure that the police are using AI and so forth, but we have to also recognize that criminals are using cryptocurrency, for example, right? And so when that first happened, the belief was, oh my God, how can we ever deal with crypto? But law enforcement is dealing with crypto. There are ways of following the chain, and that sort of thing in blockchain. So it's that constant push and pull with new technologies, but very good point.
Ouais, merci, Monsieur German.
Thank you. You also spoke to the excellent collaboration between the law enforcement agencies in Quebec. How can we improve collaboration between the different levels of law enforcement agencies? Because the first criminals who are arrested, well, be it for a speeding offense or running a red light, it's generally the municipal police that needs to be well aware of who they are intercepting in order to detain them on the ground. Here's an example. Recently, we learned that in truck inspection centers, there are some drivers that allowed some truck drivers to assume their identity. How can we include traffic controllers in this information exchange?
Yeah, we could talk about technology again. I mean, police officers working in municipal roles and in traffic roles do have access to the national computers and so forth, and that's where a lot of this data is loaded. There's no doubt that police at senior levels work very well together, but they also work well together at a very low level. I think it's at a working level. But I think it really is a matter of prioritizing. What are we looking at? And that's why I'm saying CBSA and police should be working jointly in removals. Your specific example really deals with a bit of a corruption issue, right? And we've seen a lot of that in Quebec, but Quebec's also dealt with corruption through the years, whereas other provinces are now witnessing the same thing and are not as advanced as Quebec in actually dealing with corruption. You have your own agency and so forth in Quebec. So it's a multifaceted issue that you're raising.
Rapidement, parce qu'il me laisse pas beaucoup de temps, mais
I'll be quick. I don't have much time. We've discussed technology, investments, AI, software. But what about training? Training all those law enforcement agencies. There seems to be something to be desired. Please, tell us what recommendations we can make in our report. What recommendations can we make regarding training about interpreting the laws?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I did a report on training and looked at the major police academies right across the country. And generally speaking, most provinces have fairly good police training academies. And we can be proud of that. There are exceptions, but, fairly good. And I think what you're talking about is training in issues such as integrity, ethics, and so forth. We may not be doing enough of that, and maybe that's what we should be doing. And also, again, it's a matter of explaining to police in their training that their job is not simply to deal with, let's say, traffic or whatever. It's that broader picture of immigration and the other things that are going on in our country and how police can contribute to the bigger picture.
Thank you very much, Mr. German. Merci, Monsieur le député Lauzon. Madame.
Thank you very much. Ms. Kirkland.
Much. I have learned a lot today, and I'm appreciative of all the questions asked, including those from my colleagues on the other side. I appreciated some comments you made in your introduction, especially with regard to, if you were the folks that were studying in this study, wouldn't you pick Canada? Right? And I found that interesting because, yes, generally they would. And I want to ask a question that's a little bit adjacent to that. So folks who picked Canada, they've come here and they've committed a crime after they arrive. To give you an example of what I'm talking about, I did ask a question about this in the chamber, but thought it would be appropriate here. So in the GTA, so I'm from the Toronto area. Oshawa, Ontario. In the GTA, a man tried to pay, for instance, $140 to sexually exploit a 15-year-old girl. He was caught with the cash in hand. He received a conditional discharge and no criminal record. And that was essentially because the court or the judge took into account his immigration status. So do you believe immigration consequences should ever justify lighter sentences in a case, specifically involving the sexual exploitation of a minor? And is that fair for Canadian citizens if we have a two-tier system?
I'm not familiar with a particular case, but I get your point. Without, of course, understanding or reading the decision and so forth, I'm not questioning the judge, but I would basically agree with you that it's a matter of what are relevant considerations in sentencing. We look at aggravating circumstances, we look at mitigating circumstances, and there's a lot of leeway given to the courts in that respect. Should the fact that you're going to lose your job, the fact that you may get deported, should those be considered mitigating factors or not? When it comes to the immigration one, I would say no, but I'm sure some might say yes.
I would agree with you. I would say no. In these cases, and to be clear, I'm not talking about those other mitigating factors that change the sentence. It's when. So I think that loopholes potentially in our immigration system allow for this when we suggest sentencing less a day for certain amounts will change your immigation status. You had a thought on that?
Yeah. Actually, in this country, we don't have minimum sentences in most cases. And when we did have minimum sentences, it was quite obvious the courts didn't like them, and most of them went by the wayside. So in place of minimum sentences, what we have to look at is actually specifying in those provisions within the criminal code what might be relevant factors and what might not be. And a good example, if I may, is threats against politicians, which is an issue that has been raised. Why should that not be listed as an aggravating factor? The fact that you are a politician, and a threat has been made against you, that could be put in the criminal code as an aggravating factor. So we could do that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. While I have the floor, and since we're near the end of our time with you, I just want to thank you again for being here. But I'd like to move a motion that I put on notice on Friday, March 6th, regarding a study, which would be prudent if our committee would study it. And I understand that.
This is a time for this particular study. If you would like to come back to that motion after we have left the witness, after the witness has left us, you have more time. If you want to keep exchanging with the witness, would you like to do that? Or?
Can I be assured that I will be given the floor before we adjourn?
Yes, I can be assured. You, since you raise your hand, you'll be first to speak. But before you finish your time, if you want to have one more minute, I will turn to MP Ramsey, and then we'll turn to the motion that you just hinted to.
Okay.
Okay. MP Ramsey, vous souhaitez intervenir pour 5 minutes ou?
Would you like to take your 5 minutes, Mr. Ramsey?
No. Votre tour.
Okay. The money today. In your opening remarks, you sort of portrayed Canada as the country where every criminal would like to go. I would submit to you that every other countries I looked at, especially in the Five Eyes countries, have the exact similar situation that Canada is experimenting right now. For instance, there's over 53,000 person in the absconder pool in England. There's 21,000 in New Zealand. How is Canada different than these other countries? And I could go on with France, Spain, Australia. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this.
I mean, my comment was you may well choose Canada. I'm not by any means saying Canada is the only attractive country. There are lots of attractive countries. I just returned from Australia on Friday. I mean, Australia is a beautiful country and faces many of the same challenges we do. But, I mean, we are geopolitically located in a very key spot. We are just north of the United States, the largest drug-consuming country in the world, illegal drug. United States, the largest drug-consuming country in the world, illegal drug-consuming country. There are reasons why transnational organized crime finds it very comfortable.
And so
what the hell,
I
man?
see that you're well-traveled. You're in Australia.
They don't want him speaking? Let me refresh.
And so I see.
And faces many of the same challenges we do. But, I mean, we are geopolitically located in a very key spot. We are just north of the United States, the largest drug-consuming country in the world, illegal drug-consuming country. There are reasons why transnational organized crime finds it very comfortable to be in Canada. That's not to say that Norway, Finland, Denmark would not be attractive for different reasons as well.
And so I see that you're well-traveled. You're in Australia. You're lucky you. So what could we learn from how these countries are doing regarding foreign national offenders?
That's what happens when your daughter marries an Aussie. But what we can learn is quite frankly, we should look outside our borders, and I think too often we don't do that. You know, we look internally for solutions, but there's a lot of expertise outside our country as well, and a lot of tried solutions to problems. For example, in Australia, the federal police there do an excellent job when it comes to money laundering, and there have been numerous cases involving the Australian police and the Canadian police. Their intelligence gathering is excellent. They've worked with CBSA. They move information to CBSA and to the police here. So, yes, we can, and I think to a certain extent we do, but we could probably learn even more from countries such as Australia.
And I'll switch to French, if you're okay. Donc, vous avez mentionné qu'une des choses.
One of the important things you said was to prioritize people who should be deported first. Some witnesses said that was exactly what was done in Canada here. All cases are examined one by one, and those that are the most serious are handled first. And among the 600 of the 321 that are on the run, even if the 361 that are on the run, even though those are the numbers, it's not necessarily the same 361 people that are sought at the moment. For all we know, maybe Canada's doing a great job, that those 450 people were already deported, and since there have been new people, because the statistics that we have from the Globe and Mail article, well, it's dated.
I read President O'Gorman's testimony, and of course, a very good testimony and a lot of numbers, but I guess my point is we are concerned about those criminal offenders who are in our country and are a threat to our country, right? They're the ones that are, presumably shooting up businesses and so forth. So it's a case of prioritizing and going after those. And raw numbers, 1,000 removals or whatever, doesn't really tell me very much. What I'd like to know is, on these high-risk individuals, are we actually going after them? and it might be more important to pull one of those off the street than 10 others. That's where I think you have to work closely with the police of jurisdiction.
We don't have enough data to assess properly the situation?
I wouldn't say that. I don't know. I'm no expert. I'm not an expert on what CBSA has in terms of data. They do gather lots of intelligence and so forth, so I don't have that expertise.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much to our witness. And thank you for your time, sharing your experience with us. Thank you once again for being with us.
We'll be able to invite you back and benefit even more from your expertise and experience. So as you go, I don't believe we need to suspend formally. No, Monsieur Lauzon is very being highly in demand as usual. Mr. German, thank you for coming again. We look forward to seeing you again, and we won't suspend, given that there is only Mr. German to thank, and I think you've heard our thanks quite clearly. On va se tourner vers votre.
And now, Ms. Kirkland, we will discuss your motion.
If I understand well.
Yes, I do. Thank you. And technically, I think during the time I had the floor, I did move the motion, but I'll say it again. I would like to move a motion that I put on notice March 6th in terms of a study I would like our committee to undertake examining the policies, procedures, and criteria used by the Parole Board of Canada and Correctional Services of Canada governing the issuance of conditional releases. And colleagues, the reason for this motion came from something that happened last week in my riding, and that is why it provided for me some questions, and I thought, what a good opportunity for our committee to study and find out some answers to these questions. It's about public safety, transparency, and accountability in our corrections and our parole system. On March 2nd, the Durham Regional Police Service issued a public safety alert to my community in Oshawa, but it wasn't about a storm or a missing person or, a crime that was being committed in a particular area. It was about a convicted murderer who had been temporarily released into our community. So this released individual was a man serving a life sentence for first-degree murder after he raped, tortured, and killed Darren Pepin, a 14-year-old girl in Scarborough. And to highlight it, we see headlines all the time, and they're meant to make people feel safe. And the headline here, said, man handed life sentence for sex slaying of teenage boy. And I think when the community sees those headlines, they have an expectancy that life sentence means, okay, we're safe from this person now because he has received a life sentence. And I hesitate in some ways to show this because it shows the man's face when really the face that we should consider is the face of Darren, the young boy who was murdered and raped at 14. And it's just horrifying to me as a mother with young children walking my neighborhood in Oshawa to think that this man would be walking the same streets. And I believe that everyone around this committee would feel the same way if this happened in their community. So he was a 14-year-old boy, this child. The brutality of the crime makes me question how he was granted a 72-hour unescorted temporary absence, which allowed him to, hang out in Oshawa for 72 hours completely unescorted. Durham Regional Police did the right thing. They warned people to stay vigilant and watch their backs, but I guess my opinion is that why is it my job to watch my back and stay vigilant when authorities have chosen to let this man out? And so I want to look at why. If he was alive today, Darren would be 52. Quite young. Maybe he would be a dad. Maybe he would have a family. So when police are warning residents to stay vigilant because of a murderer has been released into their community, Canadians deserve to know how and why a decision like that is made. So I do want to highlight just very briefly, and I won't, go on for too long, but, folks in my community reached out when I expressed concern about this, but more importantly, folks in young Darren's life started reaching out and making comments, family and friends and those schoolmates he went to school with. And I thought it would be appropriate for me at this time just to read a couple of those thoughts. One person said, if the community is at risk, why on earth was this guy released? Another said, disgusting. How can they let him roam free when he's supposed to serve a life sentence? Another person said, this monster did this on my street a long time ago, but he should never be let out for any reason. The little boy he murdered can't come back. This is just disgusting. Canada should do better and know better. Someone else said, Darren was such a good soul. He was funny and enjoyed to be in the company of his family and friends. Another said, his name was Darren Pepin. He was 14 years old. He was here for a short time, and then he was gone. Some of us were privileged to know him, his good nature, his infectious laughter, and being the class clown. Yes, I can relate. He had a name and a face, and he mattered. And a lot of his family and friends felt like he didn't matter last week. I'll never forget the day that young man was murdered. It's something that stayed with me and always will. I knew him personally, and he was genuinely a good young man. And then a corrections officer reached out, which is very rare for someone to make a comment, but they did. Of the 34 years I worked as a corrections officer, he is one of the few who always stood out in my mind. He was one of the first inmates who I realized was a genuine, and this is a quote, psycho, void of remorse, empathy, and compassion. So we have to figure out why do these decisions get made? How do they get made? And what's missing? What's happening? And I think that the study is very important to report back to the House. And I trust that all of my colleagues will vote unanimously to study and support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Madame Kirkland. Madame de Bellefeuille.
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Yes. Listen, it's quite troubling to hear what our colleague just said. I completely agree that we study the question. I think it's very important. I myself have an example of a woman who's named Roxane Granger, and I say her name because she allowed for her name to be said publicly. She was raped by a serial rapist named Jacques Rouleau. He recently came out of prison. And what I don't understand, and I committed to her, we don't understand that he's on a long-term oversight order. He committed another crime, and at the moment he's in a provincial prison, and his order has not been paused. So now he's in preventative detention for a crime. He's in provincial prison, but his federal surveillance long-term order has not been paused. And I find that this topic will also allow us to shed some light and better understand how this issue works so that victims and the families of victims be better informed and understand how these decisions are taken. So I agree with my colleague. However, I will propose an amendment in order to look at it in a more general way, because the important thing is to understand the system, to identify its weak points, and to identify solutions. I sent my amendment to all members of the committee in both official languages. I believe that the clerk has a copy. The subject that my colleague proposed is totally intact. I've just zoomed out a bit. And so I'll read it quickly. That the committee conduct a study in order to examine policies, procedures, and criteria used by the Parole Board of Canada and Correctional Service of Canada to govern the issuance of conditional releases, the conditions surrounding long-term supervision orders, and related release measures, particularly for individuals convicted of first-degree murder and serving life sentences. That the study examines these releases, including the transparency of decision-making processes, the adequation of information and community supervision alignment with the provincial justice system, as well as the impacts on victims and victims' families and community confidence in the justice system. That the study includes a minimum of 5 meetings, that the committee invite the Minister of Public Safety, the Minister of Justice, the Secretary of State, Combating Crime, the Chairperson of the Parole Board of Canada, the Commissioner of Correctional Service of Canada, experts in correctional matters and risk assessment, as well as any other witnesses the committee deems appropriate to call, and that the committee report its findings and recommendations to the House. We each have our reasons to study the topic, this important topic. We have witnesses in mind, and I hope that I can bring as many colleagues around the table as possible with this amendment in order to study this topic in depth. For our victims and the families of those victims, thank you, Mr. Caputo.
D'accord avec.
I agree with my colleague.
My proposed amendment, friendly amendment, was actually encapsulated by Madame de Bellefeuille's amendment. I actually wrote a paper on long-term supervision orders way back when, so I look forward to working with her on this very important issue. Thank you.
See, so just to summarize, we have a motion that moved by MP Kirkland, to which an amendment has just been submitted by Madame de Bellefeuille. Well, I'll turn again to Madame Kirkland.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm hearing myself. Thank you very much, and I appreciate the comments made by Madame Bellefeuille and our conversation beforehand. So I have no problem with the amendment that we spoke about. I would like to say that even though I'm accepting this amendment, the one line that we removed from here, and I believe it was a recommendation from the Liberals across, was that they want to remove that the study examine the public safety risk associated with these releases. I think that is exactly our job, to study the public safety risk associated with the releases. I think that's what we'll do anyway. We will study the public safety risk associated with these releases. So I would be okay with the amendment as presented by Ms. de Bellefeuille. And I hope that we have unanimous consent for this study. Thank you.
Thank you, Madame Kirkland. Monsieur le député Ramsey.
Amended motion.
Thank you.
And we're looking forward to studying the matter. It's an important matter.
Ah, j'ai oublié Monsieur Lauzon.
Merci, effectivement, on va supporter.
Thank you. Yes, we support the amendment. And we support the motion as amended by Mr. Bellefeuille as a friendly amendment. Everyone seems to agree.
Oui,
Yes, we'll see that shortly. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Is the motion as amendment passed? Yes? All right. Or rather, is the amendment passed? Yes? Is there a debate on the amended motion? No? Is the amended motion passed? Yes? Excellent. The amended motion, moved by Ms. Kirkland, is passed. Ms. Ancan, you also have a motion. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to move a motion regarding emergency management. The motion has been circulated to all members, and I have engaged in discussions on its importance.
Okay, we don't need to sit here and listen to this liberal motion. I just wanted to see what the conservative motion was there, because I mean, you kind of got to agree with that. Definitely would like to hear from the parole board on why they feel justified to release somebody who should be spending life in prison. So, I mean, we could tune into OGO, but at this point, I don't think we're gonna be missing anything. Tomorrow we got question period at 2 p.m. obviously, and then we'll try and catch as much of the Justice Committee as we can. Yeah, it's scheduled for like 7.5 hours, so we'll see if we can get through as much of it as we can, but obviously I can't sit there for the whole time. Yeah, because for me, that would be really late. Like at midnight, I don't know if I could sit at the committee till midnight, so we'll see. We'll see how long it goes. We'll catch as much of it as we can, and yep, that'll be that. Life should mean life. Yeah, exactly. Okay. But I will see you guys tomorrow. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in and watching. Hope you guys have a great evening. And